Just because of who I am and what I value in games, it is exceptionally difficult for a multiplayer game to make it onto a year-end list. I am so into story and intended experiences and tone that multiplayer modes with their inherent goofiness and fourth wall shattering conversations struggle to compete with something more individual and directed. Which is all to say, Helldivers 2 is fucking rad. Arrowhead Games' cooperative Starship Troopers Left 4 Dead mashup briefly took over the world earlier this year, and boy did it deserve to. Often, multiplayer games just exist as a kind of background context for conversations with friends. Helldivers 2 is just too forcefully designed to let me relegate it to the same position. Here's just a quick rundown of some of the things that made Helldivers 2 stand out so much for me. Number 1. Games have been bragging about their dynamic weather systems for about as long as I've been playing them, but I have never seen them be as meaningful as this. The impact, and forgive me, cinematicness of a sandstorm or blizzard in this game is second to none. I've experienced so many moments that would be the best part of a scripted game. Robots emerging from a dense fog, a fire tornado descending just as you're trying to extract, that are just a natural consequence of the game's systems. 2. Helldivers 2 pulls off the magic trick of a difficulty system that consistently makes you feel like you're in way over your head, only to let you survive and succeed by the skin of your teeth. There were obviously many missions I failed in the game, but there were far more that I assumed I would fail, but my squad instead snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. No deployment simply went according to plan. There was always some moment when shit hit the fan, and the scrambling to adjust amidst an overwhelming enemy force is what always ended up being most compelling. And 3, my god, the explosions in this game. I don't know how many hell bombs I've detonated over my time with Helldivers 2, but they are always bigger than I expect them to be, and I get a kick out of it every single time. Sometimes I think I've seen every way something could blow up in a video game. Helldivers 2 has proved me wrong in truly spectacular fashion. And I will say, this was an incredible year for shooting alien bugs. It pains me to only include Earth Defense Force 6 in my honorable mentions video, but that's just how competitive this list was. Anyway, welcome to 2024! Well, 2024 is almost done. Welcome to the end of 2024! Been a hell of a year, and I've got a hell of a list here. You know, last year, a lot of us, including me, were talking about what an extraordinary year 2023 was for games, how 2024 was probably going to be a bit of a downgrade, doom and gloom and all that. Well, I'll tell you, this list was way harder to get onto than last year's. I feel legitimately bad for everything I loved and couldn't fit into a list of 10. 11 even. I cheated, and I still left tons out. But before we get to the rest of my rankings, you know what it's time for. The list of every game I rolled credits on for the first time up until this date in 2024! Is that enough for y'all? Proof that I did my due diligence? Well, it better be, because I need you to believe me that the next game on this list is This is kind of a freak pick, because I think number 9 is kind of the spot for freak picks. Slitterhead is the first game developed by Boca Game Studio, led by the same Toyama that helmed Silent Hill 1 and the Siren series. Slitterhead is a game as nasty as its name, a game that encourages you to possess hundreds of random people across a spiraling playthrough and treat them as fully disposable meat sponges. Climb up to one of the tallest buildings in Kowloon-walled city and hurl yourself off. As long as you possess another body before you hit the ground, you'll be okay. Send tendrils of blood out of your arms to hold an enemy in place, then swap to another body to attack the temporarily immobilized bad guy. What I find so interesting about Slitterhead is it's a horror game in themes, but not necessarily in tone. The game is a blast to play, and then pretty disturbing to think about afterwards. Slitterhead is not a particularly polished experience. It starts very slow, the combat always has a hint of jank, the budget limitations are very obvious. But I have to admit, this has just endeared me more to it. I love how friction-y my playthrough was, how I found the edges of the game's design and adapted to them rather than it arriving pre-adapted to me. This is your chance to get in early on what will surely be a cult classic, or at least something you see a cutscene from years from now and say, what the hell is that? And a very special shout out to Akira Yamaoka going absolutely filthy on the soundtrack. This one is for the freaks. The best parts of From Software games are nearly always contained in their DLC. Old Hunters, Artorias, The Ringed City, so I was not surprised when, after 2 years of work, Elden Ring's colossal expansion, Shadow of the Erdtree, was absolutely superb. But I was surprised that it was able to so comprehensively improve what was already the best aspect of Elden Ring. That is, creating the most goddamn evocative fantasy world ever put in an open world game. I don't usually enjoy looking at a map in a video game. It is a means to an end, a necessary tool to get me to the place I want to go. But I adore looking at the map in Shadow of the Erdtree. It is so cleverly designed, illustrated instead of rendered, giving me the scantest hints of entire land masses that exist on top or below other locales. For decades, games have bragged that you can go to that mountain you see in the distance. Erdtree's mountains are incredibly tantalizing, a lightning-struck peak with a waiting dragon, an almost impressionist spiral of ruins ascending through the clouds. But even better are the landscapes it blindsides you with. A chasm ripped open in the earth, studded with enormous coffins, 2 contrasting fields of incandescent flowers, the finger ruins. That there might not be much to do in these places is, I think, somewhat missing the point. They exist to create a feeling of magic in the world, and it consistently stuns me that Elden Ring is able to make these fantasy worlds that simply do not feel like variations on the tropes we're all so familiar with, but entirely new visions of an entirely new land. The combat remains very fun, though neatly surpassed by upcoming entries on this list, and I think the approach to progression within the DLC is actually really clever, but the map is the thing for me. That, and Igon, of course.
Curse you, Bale!
I actually led a deepest dive on Erdtree over on MinMax, the gaming podcast I'm honored to be a part of. We talked about that game for 5+ hours, which is great if you want to hear more about Erdtree, but also, you should just be listening to MinMax anyway. If I wasn't on it, it would still be my favorite podcast. In just a couple days, we'll be doing a huge episode on stuff like the best gaming moment of the year, dumbest thing, greatest work of art of all time, 2024, and more. That's my plug. Listen to it or don't. I just love those folks. Another year, another embarrassment of riches from Yakuza. Infinite Wealth is an enormous game, so big it obviously struggles to tie all its story and themes together, but the good stuff here is good in only the way Ryuga Gotoku can pull off. Ichiban Kasuga is he's just the man. A simple takeaway, but can anyone disagree? Over the course of dozens of hours, Ichiban consistently faces characters who will not believe that he is as good of a man as he claims to be, and seeing him win them over time after time is a true joy. When I finished the game, my fiance declared that Ichiban is her favorite character that has ever been in a video game, and I find it hard to disagree. Ichiban also surrounds himself with some of the most delightful party members in gaming. I adore Adachi and how much fun they have exploring the old man bits. Chitose's arc is a blast to watch. Yamai is a perfect soft antagonist. There's that whole plotline where Zhao has a restaurant and he's upset that it's getting bad reviews, but then he has to defend the bad reviewer from his own gang members because they're too protective of him. And then it turns out that the bad reviewer was just insecure about how good the food was and he was lashing out. Layered on top of this is a very satisfying RPG progression with interesting character classes and welcome tweaks from Yakuza 7. The overall narrative of Infinite Wealth is not my favorite in the series. In fact, it's probably towards the bottom of the ones I've played. But I love these characters so damn much, and I will happily spend many more hours just hanging out with Ichiban and Kiryu's entourage. A few years ago, I covered a really tiny game called How Fish Is Made that, despite being basically an absurdist student project released for free, undeniably had the juice. There was just something there that felt like it deserved deeper analysis. And I take absolutely no credit for what the team decided to do afterwards, but I will say it is very, very rewarding to now see those same people release maybe the surprise indie horror hit of the year. Mouthwashing is one of the only games on this list that I felt compelled to play more than once, not to capture footage or hone my skills, but just because I wanted to re-experience its intricately plotted story. On first playthrough, the game wows with its evocative art design, unexpected editing, and surreal nightmare sequences. On a second time through, the entire script reveals itself as full of dreadful implication. I really don't want to say too much about the plot because that is the whole thing here, but I think if you like the vibes of, say, Signalis or Silent Hill, I think you will find a lot to appreciate here. I especially want to point out just how talented those developers are at scene composition and framing, even within their intentionally low-res art style. There are a number of ways the game uses flaws like digital artifacting in ways I've genuinely never seen before. Wrong Organ, the game's developer, is now officially a studio to watch. I have never played a Persona game. It was not a series I got into when I was younger, and the length always scared me off from trying them as an adult. So it was with no small amount of trepidation that I started playing Metaphor ReFantazio. I am so glad I did. Here was my revelation playing Metaphor, one that was maybe already obvious to everyone else. I generally knew that the game operated on a calendar system. For example, you have 12 days before this big event happens, and you get to spend those 12 days doing whatever you want. I assumed that this calendar would make the whole game stressful, that I would experience constant FOMO from not being able to do everything I wanted. Here's what I didn't realize. With an RPG this long, FOMO is a gift. Because Metaphor has a clock constantly ticking down, you always feel like you're able to get one over on the game by structuring your days as efficiently as possible. Side quests and character bonding conversations are no longer things you can do, but things you get to do. Ordinarily, I might get sick of side quests or deepening my relationship with characters, But in Metaphor, the calendar reframes all these typical RPG tasks as opportunities, and it's all you can do to squeeze in as many as you can before the larger story pulls you forward. This structure absolutely propelled me through all 80 hours of the game, and I never once felt exhausted by it. Of course, it didn't hurt that Metaphor basically only has interesting characters. Fidelio and Basilio might accompany Ichiban as my favorite dudes of the year, but Metaphor finds ways to make even the boring character archetypes compelling. I loved having deep, heartfelt conversations with my misfit group of regicists, almost as much as I loved using the game's job system to mold them into my perfect combination of like 6 different archetypes. Atlas's talent with visually striking UI goes without saying, but I cannot believe how many of those 80 hours I spent swapping character skills around in the menus, and how little I minded. Metaphor might not quite achieve the searing political takes I craved, but the characters are lovely, the game's heart is good, and the feeling of wiping 10 baddies off the board with a multi-target, perfectly planned weakness is phenomenal. You know, the last time I talked to you from this place, which is, in fact, my living room, I was announcing something pretty major, which is that I was finally writing a book. Now, many months later, I have actually done it. I've written the book. It's called How a Game Lives. It's coming out early next year, and I am truly, immensely proud of it. My writing in it it's good, it's fine, whatever. But the guest essays in this are some of my favorite games writing I've read in years. This is a book not just about games, but about how to think about them and write about them and what it means to care about this art form. Also, if you need a gift for this season, or if you want someone to have a gift for you, it is very available for pre-order. We even made a little card that says, "Hey, I got you Jacob Geller's book. That's how much I care about you." Links to all that in the description. You know, as iterative as games are, they also often benefit from restraint. Unless you're inventing an entirely new genre, you've probably got a lot of games behind you, and it must be hard to not just take every good idea they've all ever had and smash them into one giant spectacle. Or, in the case of Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, you could do exactly that and hope it all just works. The Lost Crown has, the map seller's charm system and ever-expanding world of Hollow Knight, the hyper-technical platforming of Ori, the reality switching of Guacamelee, the challenge and insane animation quality of Metroid Dread, a hefty dose of anime and history thrown in, and a whole Prince of Persia franchise to pay respects to, and somehow, that maximalist approach all coalesces into one of the most engagingly designed and technically accomplished Metroidvanias I've played. A first playthrough of The Lost Crown took me 20 hours, and I have never played a game in this genre for that long without getting at least a little frustrated. Until now. For as huge as the world is, and it is huge, progression is clearly demarcated without losing its sense of discovery. The upgrades are clever and deftly handled. As my friend Jesse pointed out, the game gives you literal time travel before a double jump, and combat is swift, responsive, and lavishly animated. And if you have even a little of the platformer sicko gene in you, if you've ever strawberry hunted in Celeste, for instance, The Lost Crown contains some of the most devilishly designed gauntlets I've ever air-dashed through. After the release of the game, which reviewed extremely well and I assume will continue to grow in reputation for years, Ubisoft disbanded the team who made it and scattered them to other projects. Fuck this industry, man. Even when you win, you lose. But guess what? Here, in this video, no one makes the rules but me. I pick the games, I pick the words, and I pick how numbers work. So here's what's happening now. Another number 4. Even with the notable lack of Silksong this year, Team Cherry, take your time, no pressure from me, Metroidvania fans have been well fed over the last several months. Obviously, The Lost Crown is excellent, to say nothing of Animal Well's emergent spookiness or the arguably 4 Metroidvanias in UFO 50. But out of all of these, one connected to my heart and soul and gut on a more visceral level than any other. And that's because Nine Souls isn't just a Metroidvania, it's a Sekiro-like. Developed by Red Candle Games, the Taiwanese studio who previously made horror titles Detention and Devotion, Nine Souls presents like other platforming-heavy 2D exploration games. You gain abilities and explore an expanding world, and all that stuff is very well done. But my love of Nine Souls grew not from its exploration, but my slow realization that Red Candle Games spent its years of development crafting perhaps the most finely tuned boss fights ever pushed into this genre. Years ago, I spent an entire video talking about how Sekiro's bosses push players into an almost zen-like pursuit of perfection, that the knowledge that an encounter could be done perfectly provided the motivation to go beyond mere proficiency. Nine Souls thrives on this idea, with multi-part encounters that steadily ratchet up their complexity, lightning-fast strings of attacks becoming second nature to parry and dodge. There is a fight in this game clearly inspired by Hollow Knight's Mantis Lords that became a dizzying barrage of attacks typically only seen in fan mods, and yet every attack is eminently readable and dodgeable. The true final boss of this game is a Sword Saint Ishin level impossibility, a mountain that I painstakingly climbed and now remember with the fondness of an old friend. Nine Souls also has a story that really sneaks up on you and some really nice and disturbing art design, but it's the boss fights that are the star of the show here, and my god, does that star shine brightly. Look, what can you even say about Balatro? Well, here's something. When it comes to deck builders, I think almost all of them exist in the shadow of Slay the Spire, which is probably one of the most brilliantly designed games of the last 20 years. And Balatro, somehow, builds such a strong identity of its own that I could see it creating basically a new evolutionary branch of deck builders, rather than just inheriting the design ethos of Slay the Spire. Part of how it pulls this off is simply the aesthetic wrapper. For a game that is, at its core, just about making poker hands, Balatro has the experiential thrill of something like pinball. Simply making a straight or a flush becomes an explosion of multipliers and chips and sounds and light. The choice to make the score calculator catch fire when your hand exceeds the total points needed for a round is probably my favorite design flourish of the year. It transforms what is basically an order of operations math problem into something that is consistently exciting and surprising. It is a game in which almost every successful run feels overpowered in a new and revelatory way, constantly unveiling new ways in which you can break the rules. It is also why, as much as I've played Balatro this year, I've enjoyed watching other streamers. Okay, just Northern Lion. Play it as well. I never watch streamers, yet somehow the primal satisfaction of the game comes through even when I'm just watching someone else. I also just have to give my utmost respect to the game's creator, Local Thunk, for making a game that could so easily have turned into a real money gambling abyss and resisted the urge to predatorily monetize it in any way. That rocks. If I ever find out there's a Balatro slot machine or something, I will take it off this list. One of the things I tend to like about indies is they're often about something, with more precision and focus than a larger game can manage. And I don't just mean they're moralizing or games for impact or whatever the Game Awards category is. I just mean that smaller teams often have a specific thing they want to talk about with a game, and they make a game to the scope that the idea deserves. What's remarkable about 1000 Times Resist is how personal and specific and focused it manages to be on so many things. Watching 1000 Times Resist simultaneously explore themes of memory, immigration, revolution, family, friendship, loyalty, extraterrestrial life, regret, and preservation, in retrospect, it feels impossible, spinning a plate and juggling a chainsaw and swallowing a sword all at once. And yet, playing 1000 Times Resist is an even greater magic trick, because the spinning and juggling and sword swallowing all happens in the background, and the foreground becomes a series of personable, funny, clearly defined characters sailing through a non-stop deluge of incredible scenes. Things that initially seem to be weaknesses of the game, relatively static scenes or repeated environments and character designs, are retrofitted to be the game's strengths. I genuinely don't think 1000 Times Resist would be a better game if it had quadruple the budget. Here's just a list of other things I would be disappointed in myself if I didn't mention. The heart-rendingly emotional soundtrack by Drew Redman and Lion Cacho, the wonderfully understated and earnest voice acting, including one of my favorite decisions of the year, casting a literal child to be the game's bodiless companion character and letting their voice change in real time as the story goes on.
These are names, Watcher. Unique strings assigned to people, animals, and objects of affection. They're irrespective of function.
The surreal composition of the scenes, particularly this one, where the city melts into the water, melts into the sky. If I was to list 2024's best moments of video game storytelling, 1000 Times Resist wouldn't just take the top spot. You'd probably get 5 or 6 entries into the list before seeing another game show up. It is a staggering achievement of narrative design, and I look forward to people realizing just how good it is for years to come. I've spent a lot of my career as a video game talker, arguing that games are more than just fun. They can be mature, artistic objects full of beauty and pathos and insight. No one doubts that video games are fun. It's their assumed status. Everything else is a surprise, and that tends to be what I care most about. But sometimes, fun is what a game should be. And god damn it, Astrobot might be the most fun game I've ever played. And part of the joy of Astrobot is witnessing that creating fun, real, true, universal fun, takes as much skill and craft as creating pathos or something more mature. There are very few studios that could pull off what Team Asobi has created here. A toy box that never stops surprising, a digital world where the simple acts of walking through snow or crashing through glass are so delightful that those experiences are their own reward. Astrobot is a game in which nothing was taken for granted. Every piece feels lovingly doted upon, never hastily assembled as just part of the game, but examined, analyzed, passionately considered, and then fit into a wonderfully assembled universe. There are just no bad levels in Astrobot. There aren't even any mid-tier levels. Everyone's had the idea, what if we made a game out of only the good stuff? Do you know how hard it is to actually make a game out of only the good stuff? How in touch you have to be with players' motivations, the combination of self-direction and guided pacing you have to balance? It is a triumph of design, and even more so, it's a game that knows it. The finale of Astrobot is one of the most explosive acts of self-love I've seen from a studio, and yet the game has earned that love hour by hour. On that note, there is the question of Astrobot's corporateness. The fact that it truly is a game about the PlayStation video game brand. You rescue bots from all across Sony's console history, you gradually rebuild a PS5, you are fully immersed in a world of IPs, and constantly reminded how fun IPs can be. For many people, this is a really off-putting side of an otherwise brilliant game. And I get it. Everyone navigates our corporate hellscape differently, and I would never tell anyone that they don't get it for objecting to how brandy Astrobot is. For me, this is also part of the game that is not completely, fully fun, but in a slightly different way. I, to be clear, adored rescuing all the little guys. I got so excited in a dumb, kid-pointing-at-reference way every time I found the Kiryu robot or Pyramid Head or Trico or any other media that I've loved in the past. I loved getting them their little accessories and seeing them all populate the crash site. And then I would look at that giant collection of creations and think about how many of them came from studios that didn't exist anymore, were sculpted by people no longer in the game industry. I would think about how Team Asobi itself, this spectacular collection of talent capable of making the most fun game ever, came from the wreckage of Japan Studio, the force behind many of Astrobot's most loving tributes, all but dismantled in the last 4 years. The game, for all its mastery of fun, can't help but be bittersweet. It often feels less advertisement and more memorial. Team Asobi remembers. I found it kind of beautiful. And that's the end of my overstuffed top 10, which still doesn't include half the games that deserve their flowers this year. Thank you for valuing what I have to say. Still, I really never expected to do this for as long as I have. I never expected it would result in so many friends and artistic collaborators and being able to ask all my favorite writers to help me write a book, and then all of them saying yes, or ask all my friends to do a 24-hour charity stream and them all jumping on. If you've been here from the beginning, from a little experiment on Night in the Woods in Tacoma, thank you for being here. And if this is the very first video you've ever seen from me, thank you too. But the party ain't over yet. This is the longest top 10 video I've done, and yet it only manages to talk about games? What about the movies I watched in 2024? What about the books I read? What about even more games? Well, that all exists too, in an exclusive video for Nebula. First essay in the book is an unbelievable piece of writing. To me, felt very much like a statement on filmmaking and making art in general. Kunitsugami and Slitterhead were right up against each other. This marks the 3rd year running I've made a Nebula exclusive year-end video with all my favorite media that couldn't fit into a traditional list. It also marks the 30th video of mine that you can only see on Nebula. For context, I released 10 essays on YouTube this year. If you sign up for Nebula right now, just think how much you'll be able to blast through over the holidays. And even in this expensive holiday season, Nebula is relentlessly affordable. If you sign up right now using my code, I'll even give you 40% off. It'll only cost you $3 a month with an annual subscription. I want you to consider 2 things. 1, would you even notice missing $3 a month? And 2, would you notice roughly double the amount of Jacob Geller videos in your life? If the answers to those questions are no, then yes, I really think you should check out Nebula. Or, even better, know someone in your life who would adore Nebula? You can gift them a subscription and even keep my same discount. Happy Hanukkah, here's a year of Nebula. Or even, Happy Hanukkah, here's a lifetime of Nebula. Sign up now, hear my thoughts on I Saw the TV Glow, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, the best books I read this year, and more. All that only on Nebula. Get 40% off an annual subscription or gift that subscription to someone else who'd love it. Links for everything in the description.
We are Bob Boys! For breaking the law, breaking the world, 壊せ切り裂けtenderness for breaking the rule 六法全書じゃ縛れない波乱分子さ振り上げた握り拳が俺たちのジャッジメント